Loren Scott's life was magical and tragic, from Paris's runways to Hollywood's elite. She was adored worldwide for her excellent elegance and acclaimed creations. In secret, Loren yearned for parenthood and diligently prepared 2 lovely rooms in her house for her children. Her desire was cruelly crushed by her husband's reluctance, casting a cloud over her brilliant life. Her narrative contrasts public triumph with inner grief, the chase of perfection, and the crushing weight of unmet dreams. Let's explore Loren Scott's personal and emotional journey to discover the actual cost of a perfect existence. Early trauma. The lady who would become Loren Scott was born Luann Bambra on April 28, 1964, under unfortunate circumstances. Her original parents quickly abandoned her after she was born into a modest Roy, Utah household, and a Mormon couple took her in. Her early years were marked by struggle and otherness, since she had experienced such a severe rejection at such a young age. The more complicated things became, the more she matured and went to school. And wow, how did she mature? Hey there, tall girl. She, grew up like Scott did. She had already surpassed 6 feet in height by her teens and would finally level at a neat 6'3". Though one should assume it would make her well-liked, or at the very least a first-round selection for the basketball team, the young lady faced further hardships. Already taller than most of the youngsters in her immediate vicinity, with blonde hair and blue eyes, she stood out and was dubbed Stretch by the sarcastic crowd. In addition, she would find other things bothersome about her height. Charged as an adult. Because of her height, Scott was often mistrusted when people inquired about her age. She had to pay for it. Cashiers refused to accept that she wasn't an adult at establishments like movie theaters, charging her the total amount rather than the child's discount. Lula, her devoted mother, strongly advocated for her enormous daughter. "Stand up straight, shoulders back, get your heels on," she would constantly advise Scott, making sure her kid never felt as if she had to minimize herself for a world that was too tiny for her. Loren also had trouble fitting into kids' clothes sizes due to her height. Her remedy? She designed and customized her clothing, a talent that would be extremely helpful for her work eventually. A stroke of luck. For Loren, life in Utah was always a little slight, pun intended. She found her ticket out of the Mormon homeland by pure coincidence as she was searching for it. While on vacation in Loren's hometown, photographer Bruce Weber saw her and thought she would be the ideal for the Calvin Klein ad he produced. That position paid well, and Weber gave her some excellent business advice. She made the risky decision to invest her money in relocating to Paris. She didn't even inform her parents of her actions. Abruptly, she found herself living in the epicenter of style and elegance outside of Utah, but even if her profession was taking the correct turn, she still had to face challenging concerns concerning her personal life. Luann no more. For Luann, reinvention was the buzzword of the day. Her focus had switched to popularity after moving to Paris, and she believed she needed a new name to achieve that. Something worthy of a celebrity. Her new name was conceived with assistance from her agency. Luann Bambra had passed away, and Loren Scott, a mysterious and dynamic lady with a global name, had taken her position. But changing your name is one thing. Altering your physical appearance is quite another. For a tall lady, modeling might seem like a no-brainer, but as it turns out, she was deemed too tall even for the industry. However, her mother had advised her not to shrink down, and she was determined to follow it. "Where my hose at?" Her mother had always urged her not to shrink back, and she tried to live up to that. Scott's agency advised her to make up her shoe size and height on her resume, but she adamantly refused. She'd been lying for far too long, and it was time to start lying again. Her legs would ultimately be the asset that landed her the next primary job, as it turned out. They were ideal for pantyhose advertisements. David Bailey recruited Scott to film an ad for Pretty Polly Hosiery. He framed her so that her legs looked like the hands of a clock when he snapped her picture from 30 feet above the ground. Bailey proudly remarked that Scott had the best legs in the world. Loren was given the benefit of the doubt, but she was far from done. Going west. Although she had only lived in Paris for less than 5 years, that proved plenty for her. After refocusing her attention on Hollywood, Scott relocated to Los Angeles and began collaborating with renowned photographer Herb Ritts. He assigned her to style Jim Carrey's Rolling Stone cover shot in 1955. Ritts was so pleased with her work that they started a long and fruitful collaboration. She met a variety of celebrities as a result of this. She developed and became a well-liked stylist for celebrities, including Nicole Kidman, Sarah Jessica Parker, and Penelope Cruz. She treated them like sisters, letting them be honest and open with her. She later said that the majority of a stylist's job included psychology. But before long, she was searching for her love, a suggestion that would unleash a whole new set of problems. Love and/or marriage. By the end of the 1980s, Scott had stopped modeling entirely. She again changed her identity to Lauren Scott and fell in love with Andrew Ladsky, a London real estate entrepreneur. Ladsky was and is a mystery. Even now, it might be challenging to locate images of the individual. The tabloids were desperate to get any information about him. She was almost a whole foot taller than he was, and even after they were married, Scott remained very private about the two of them. Their relationship was going well, until all of a sudden, everything went south. Getting out. Marriage number 1 was over, but marriage number 2 was rapidly approaching. She soon met another Anthony, this time Anthony Brand, who was the manager of his mother's Prada franchise in Beverly Hills, and Scott swiftly took on the role of his PR manager. Things were looking suitable for the newlyweds, but trouble was already brewing for the couple. No one ever really understood why their marriage ended as abruptly as it did, only 9 months into their matrimony. However, her need to get out was so severe that she had to call in British intelligence. At 48 hours' notice, she wanted it sooner, they swept in and helped her gather all her belongings, and Ladsky was placed under surveillance. An unhealthy matrimony. Scott was growing sickly and frighteningly thin under his gaze, and it wasn't clear why, though many believe it had to do with his family's attitude toward her. They were critical of them as a couple and seemed unable to understand what she did, whether she was a model, stylist, brand manager, or just a hanger-on. Eventually, the relationship became too demanding for them, and the marriage broke up. What followed was when she ignored love and instead immersed herself in her art, though this was also problematic. Fashion is murder. Art is war. Even though Scott continued to work as a freelancer with her colleague Ritts regularly in the late 1990s, criticism was beginning to mount, particularly in regards to her Oscars styling choices. Renee Zellweger, pictured, was given a dress that was deemed too prom night, and Mariah Carey received a second piece that was said to make Carey appear overweight. The 1990s were a great time for women, weren't they? Nevertheless, Scott was used to receiving criticism by this point, and she knew how to handle it. Intimidation. Confidence is key. Scott had developed a tough exterior over the years and knew how to project an intimidating confidence level. She even defended her controversial fashion choices from the past when David Naylor, the man who had given her the go-ahead for a commercial shoot, peppered her with questions. She knew what she was doing, and even revealed a few personal details to Mr. Naylor. Most importantly, though, she sold out her relationship with Ritts, the man who had opened doors for her. She proudly declared, "I make all the decisions anyway," about Ritts, a statement that eventually got around and ended their collaborations forever. However, we all know what is said about doors closing and opening, and behind this new door was something very special. Get some satisfaction. After attending a dinner where she became friendly with Mick Jagger, the Rolling Stones singer, Scott had always been the center of attention, but this time it came from someone she could never have imagined. After dinner, the two of them hit the clubs, and after Jagger confessed that he was infatuated with her legs as she danced on a table, he was ready to bring someone new into the fold. Scott claimed she didn't know who Jagger was, making him even more irrational. Eventually, she consented to date him, but only on the condition that he keep their relationship a secret because she didn't want to deal with the criticism of the press. They managed to date covertly for over 3 years, and here's how. Gimme shelter. To avoid the paparazzi, Jagger would frequently meet Scott in hotels. His home even had a secret back exit, which was very handy. However, the location of his house came with some additional troubles, the main one being his neighbor, his ex-wife, Jerry Hall. Jagger had moved next door to her so that he could easily see his kids. Hall was not thrilled with this and probably didn't appreciate having to see her ex-hubby's new girl doing the walk of shame regularly. By 2003, Hall put her foot down and, flying under the radar, stopped. Off the hook. Scott had not maintained a close relationship with her family after leaving Utah, but a phone call she received at Christmas ultimately revealed the truth to them. Her brother had received a call from a British man who seemed familiar and asked for her, and this led her family to learn that she was seeing Mick Jagger. Although they weren't entirely shocked to learn that she was seeing someone, the couple's specifics still came as a shock. Still, at least the relationship was out, and they seemed ready to share their love with the world. Can't get no satisfaction. Now that they were in the public eye, the couple had to deal with new difficulties. Chief among them were Jagger's bandmates, who, in Scott's eyes, appeared less of the rabble-rouser he'd been in his youth and behaved more maturely than in the past. He was constantly tending to Scott's needs and, by some accounts, apologizing to people. If she saw him flirting with other women at all, she would fire daggers in his general direction. The band didn't like this. They missed the iconic Jagger swagger. She was entering a decades-old dynamic, which was made more difficult by the fact that they missed Mick's ex, Jerry Hall. Charlie Watts referred to her as a snob. Richards called her La Man, based on her height and shoe size. Nonetheless, Jagger's family adored her. His youngest grandson even called her Glammy, a portmanteau of glamour. You can't always get what you want. After Scott's father passed away in 2002, she traveled to Utah with personal security. When she spoke to her sister Jan that same year, she revealed something shocking and painful. Even with her wealth, success, and rock star boyfriend, Loren was still missing something. She told Jan that she envied her because she had a family and hoped to have one of her own. But Mick seemed to be against the idea since he already had kids and grandkids and wasn't keen on marriage either. Nevertheless, it seemed like Scott was clinging to misplaced optimism when she showed 2 rooms that were for the children, without ever mentioning which children. Sugar Hubby. In 2006, Scott was introducing her clothing line, Little Black Dress. The collection featured, you guessed it, black dresses. The line was becoming popular. Madonna had been spotted wearing one, the headmistress dress. Scott also defined her brand, which led to the creation of what her fans affectionately called Lorenisms, which were little nuggets of wisdom about life that had nothing to do with beauty. Examples of these nuggets were: wear a nude heel to make your legs appear longer, spray perfume on your wrist rather than your hand, never use plastic utensils when eating, and never ever drink out of a bottle. Doing these things would make you more like her. She even had Mick do them. Ripple effect. After she passed away in 2014, Mick Jagger was not himself. He sought medical attention and was eventually diagnosed with acute traumatic stress disorder. His grief was so intense that it interfered with his daily routine. He released a statement to the public in which he said, "I am still struggling to understand how my lover and best friend could end her life in this tragic way. We all are, Mick." The Emperor of Rock's New Clothes. Perfectionism was the name of the game with Scott, and this would often cause her great stress. At one point, she ripped up 25 pairs of pants until she found something that worked for her. This perfectionism even found its way into her approach to romance. In short, she had a duty to make sure her man shone like a diamond. She enjoyed stocking his wardrobe with opulent, shiny outfits of all stripes. There's no denying that he looked good on stage during this period. The best things in life aren't free. Friends would practically salivate over the way Scott and her partner lived, but beneath all the glamour, the cracks were starting to appear. Scott loved luxury, but it was always on Jagger's tab, and while she was devoted to her man, the question was beginning to linger, was he devoted to her? Scott was a past master at making everything around her look nice, whether that be clothing, her boyfriend, her life in general, or even their dates. Everything had to be perfect. Lies. Scott was not well liked in her native Utah, but in 2008, following her mother's death, she made another extraordinary journey back to pay her respects. Following a protracted period of mourning, she returned to London, where she was met with controversy. The British tabloids were enthralled with a story about her partner, Mick, making out with her, claiming to have seen her with a fabric production manager named Molly Miller Monday. It's not exactly the kind of news to hear when you're grieving for your mother. She got the silver. Scott ignored the rumors because her 70-year-old boyfriend couldn't possibly be having side pieces at this point in his life, right? Well, maybe not. In 2010, it was revealed that Jagger had given Miller jewelry for Christmas. He had a history of buying jewelry for the women in his life that he liked. Scott had even stated that it was the only jewelry he had ever bought for her. Later that year, Scott made a sizable investment, and rumors began to surface about where she had obtained the funds. Life in the concrete jungle. In 2010, Scott made an absurd investment in a $5.6 million New York apartment she had all to herself. Although it makes sense for her to have her own space in the fashion-forward city of New York, that's still a hefty price tag. The apartment was lavish, sophisticated, and expensive. It even featured an elevator that delivered your car right to your door. Decadent is an understatement regarding the luxury it affords, so she had to resort to less than appetizing means of survival. Pride will get you. It was time for Loren to raise outside capital for her business, so she reached out to Robert Bensusan, the former head of Christian LaCroix and Jimmy Choo, whose name was in her address book, asking for a loan to help support her endeavors. However, when he asked for interest in the money, Scott turned tail, trotting out her sad backstory about growing up in the Mormon world and moving to Paris with no name to speak of, to which he responded by suggesting that she ask her boyfriend if she needed money. She was embarrassed to ask for more capital when he had already invested so much, and Scott was running out of time. Hearts of stone. Even with their impressive clientele, which included none other than First Lady Michelle Obama as a devoted patron, Scott's business was failing miserably, and Mick was growing increasingly irritated with him as word spread, and Jagger realized his investment in danger of disappearing. She blamed the problem on a new CEO, but Mick insisted on forcing her to face the people she had let down. The relationship was beginning to deteriorate, showing in Scott's work in the fashion industry. Metaphorical Fashion. At this point, Scott's work had begun to take on a somewhat melancholic quality. Her most recent runway collection drew heavily from the artwork she kept in her beloved New York apartment, much of it from the Japanese movement of tagasori, a style of art in which clothing is depicted draped over racks, pictured. Scott explained boldly that these were the beautiful outfits a woman might wear for a husband who was away fighting in a war, but many speculated there was a deeper meaning behind it all. I saw her today at the reception. Scott was going through something, but the world was not exactly sure what it was, and this would be her last show, though no one knew it at the time. The show opened with a chorus of Buddhist monks chanting, which was a prominent feature of the trip that Jagger had taken to Laos and not brought Scott along on. At the end of the piece, the final model entered in a white wedding dress while the line, "I feel like crying," was repeated. Getting knocked down. 2013 had been a year of disappointment for Scott. The next round of setbacks, though, was entirely medical. She suffered a severe injury to her knee that required crutches, but that wasn't all. She then contracted a crippling flu that sent her to the hospital and resulted in a prescription for sinusitis. Her health was rapidly deteriorating, making it nearly impossible for her to meet the needs of all of her clients. This situation was not going to improve anytime soon. Shattered. Even though Scott was silent at home, the evergreen Mr. Jagger continued to live up to his rock star lifestyle, going out and making women fall in love with him. He had invited Scott to travel with him, but it is evident that she needed to be in better shape to do so. At this point, rumors started circulating that Jagger had been secretly seeing the 27-year-old ballerina Melanie Hemrick while on tour in Japan. The pressure of the business, combined with her partner's apparent infidelity, meant that Loren could not handle anything, and things ended in the worst possible way. The end. Just months before Scott would have turned 50, she left a mysterious note for her assistant that said, "Come by." The assistant followed her instructions, but when she got there, she didn't expect to find Scott dead, hanging from a scarf tied to her doorknob. The paramedics were called, but by then they were essentially undertakers. They carried Scott out of her apartment as dignified as they could, past a crowd of photographers desperate to get a final picture of Jagger's fallen princess for a tabloid. The fashion world was shocked. How did Mick react? Sympathy for the devil. After learning that the Rolling Stones shows in Australia and New Zealand had been canceled, Jagger broke down in tears. He later posted a message on his website stating that he would never forget the designer and former model, Loren Scott. In 2020, 6 years after her suicide, Jagger wrote a happy birthday message on his wall. The gift of debt. After her death, more information about Scott's struggles became available. While many had assumed that her fashion line would fail soon due to low sales, it surprised everyone to learn that Scott owed Mick Jagger $10 million. Her debt was one of the many testament to her love for the singer. Despite his challenging behavior in the final stages of their relationship, Mick Jagger was the beneficiary of everything, including her debt. Going to the chapel. Her brother Randall was devastated by her passing and sobbed uncontrollably as he heard her ask, "Why would you hurt so many people?" It was evident that Scott had been hurting for some time, and she had one last message to reflect her inner life. Scott had finally convinced Jagger to accompany her to a chapel, though not under the ideal circumstances. They weren't bride and groom, they were casketed and kin. It is a grim compromise, to put it mildly. The final message. Her entire death was shrouded in a mystery of the obvious. There were undoubtedly reasons to end the relationship, the debt and the cheating boyfriend, for example, but the picture still felt incomplete, as if there were a missing piece that would give it meaning. Some believe she provided that piece to the world as a mysterious Facebook post. After her death, her social media was updated, possibly by automation, with an image taken by photographer Tim Walker, which showed a variety of party dresses hung from trees and bathed in a ghostly light, echoing her final show and the ideals of Tagasodi she was embodying. Shortly afterward, the image was removed, effectively closing the book on Loren Scott. Legacy. In 2014, Loren Scott took her own life, leaving behind a debt-ridden family and social circle shocked that her best friend and lover, Mick Jagger, had ended her life so tragically. "I am still struggling to understand how my lover and best friend could end her life in this tragic way," Jagger said via Vanity Fair. "We spent many wonderful years together and had made a great life for ourselves." Though her arm candy often overshadowed her achievements, Mick Jagger was ultimately unfaithful to her and never gave her the family she craved. She exuded confidence, and I couldn't help but be impressed by her skill. The honors that others have bestowed upon her have moved me.
If you've watched the video till here, that means you've enjoyed the video. Subscribe. Don't forget to turn on the notifications bell icon